Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night from whatever part of the world you come from. Welcome to the OER Movement for Social Justice and English Language Teaching webinar by Dr. Ossiannilsson. Our second event of our series of raising awareness about OER within the TESOL community. So my name is Shadia Mansour, and I'll be co-moderating with my colleague, Mary Allegra. Mary, hi, she's right here. This webinar is brought to you by TESOL International members and OER team advocates, Shadia Mansour, myself, Charity Davenport, and Sharon Jaden Glass. Hello. As well as TESOL Computer Assisted Language Learning Interest Section Call IS. And Mary today represents the Call IS. Before we get started, Sharon would like to ask you a little favor to do. Please, Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah, so we are intensely interested in finding out where people are from and their level of interest in OER, because we want to use that information to report back to TESOL International about membership interest in the specific topic. So I put in the chat a Google form for you to tell us how interested you are in OER. And if you want us to reach out to your email address to let you know of upcoming events that we provide on OER, please do feel free to give us that information as well. And I'll enter it a couple more times throughout the session so that the new people can see it too.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Sharon. So today we're honored really to have our featured speaker, Dr. Ebba Ossiannilsson, virtually with us from Sweden. Thank you, Dr. Ebba, for accepting our invitation and being here today. So before we get started again with the presentation, but here I'm very pleased to introduce you, Dr. Ebba, for you. Dr. Ossiannilsson is a consultant. She's an expert, an influencer, and quality assessor in the field of open, flexible, online, and distance learning. She advocates, promotes, and contributes to improving open and online learning in the context of SDG4 and futures of education. She's on the board both of ICDE and EDEN. She works as an international quality assessor, and she chairs the ICDE OER Advocacy Committee since 2017, and she's also appointed as the chair for another mandate period until 2024. She has served in several other missions for ICDE, and she was a research director for the Global Overview of Quality Models Study 2014-2015 and Blended Learning 2017. With nearly 20 years of experience in her field, Dr. Ebba received the title of EDEN Fellow 2014, the EDEN Council of Fellows 2018, the Open Educational Europa Fellow 2015, the ICDE Ambassador for the Global Advocacy of OER 2017. In addition, Dr. Ossiannilsson works with the European Commission as the Vice President in the Swedish Association for Distance Education and National Organization for E-Competence. Her publications comprise over 200 plus at the national level. Welcome, Dr. Ebba, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you, thank you. So here, a very friendly reminder to keep your mics off. We will have plenty of time for Q&As at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and Mary and I will keep track with them. Thank you. Dr. Ebba, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would also like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever. I think that is the new greeting phrase we use international nowadays when we meet online for different conferences and webinars. We don't know the time zones really, but it's great that we can manage to do it and to meet as we're doing online. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for the kind invitation and also for the introduction. It was great when you contacted me, Shadia, to ask me if I wanted to join your webinar series. And of course I wanted, because as when you introduced me, I'm a great advocate for OER and for opening up education. And I think we really have to work on that on a broad level. So I know Shadia Mansour and Sharon Chad Glass since before, as I attended one of the webinars, actually the first webinar some weeks ago, and also the TESOL Association, which seems to be a very great association and network. So I'm really, really happy to be here to discuss with you and to learn together with you, and of course also to share some of my experiences I have with OER and the OER movement. I have been involved since more or less since the beginning, since 2002, when it all started, when the concept was coined, and when my MIT launched some of the courses for free. So it has been a long journey, and I will talk more about that. We have plenty of time, so I really hope that you have questions, and you can put them either in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'm sure the host will moderate it. I choose this image, first of all, because I'm really a strong believer about rhizomatic learning. And I think if we really should move towards open education, we also need to embrace a different kind of pedagogy or andragogy if we're working with adults, to more like to have a new curriculum towards the rhizomatic learning and to learning within and together with the society, and not those strict curricula which often are in place around the world today. And we also need to take the learner's perspective to embrace this rhizomatic learning. Because learning is a journey, and learning is about the joy of learning and the gratitude of learning. So I choose the title about the OER movement for social justice, because quite often when I'm discussing with different kind of conferences, different kind of audiences, some think that OER are just, the resources as such, but I always like to take the OER movement in a broader perspective and to connect it to what is the purpose of it. So nowadays, I never give any kind of presentations about OER without talking about social justice and human rights and the SDGs and the futures of education. But the audience we have today, I'm very sure that you are all aware about that, so it's no problem. But we need to, OER is not a goal as such. It has a very, very serious and very, very promising mission. And of course, I would like to try to put it in a context which is yours about English language teaching and the organization you're working for with TESOL. So I would like to not read this for you, but I think it maybe if you are going back to the slides, maybe it is good to remember who I am and why I'm talking the way I'm doing from the experience I have. So the agenda will be shortly about social justice and human rights, the SDGs, the open movement as such. Of course, about the OER recommendation, which was adopted in 2019, which remarked a very special milestone for us in the area and also for the futures of the OER. I will talk about CC and the 5 or 6 Rs, about the OER Dynamic Coalition and some resources which maybe is connected for you especially. And then of course we have a question and answer and dialogue. I hope that is fine for you. So to start with human rights and social justice. It has been argued already since the United Nations many, many years ago, stated the human rights and the social justice agenda to give the opportunities for everyone to be a responsible and inclusive citizen around the globe. And social justice is very much about, here in this slide, for example, we have a lot of isms approaches like feminism, like ageism, like sexism and ableism and this kind of things. But we need to embrace the diversity of people and within the international global arena. And also that there is not one size which fits all. Diversity is important and in all means, and that means ages, gender, religion, attitudes, professions, culture, history, languages, etc., etc. And first then we can talk about social justice. And I will come back to argue why it is so important to talk about social justice, especially when we are talking about OER. Maybe I can indicate it already by now so you know what I mean. Quite often OER are in English. That is, of course, very good for those who speak English and can understand English, but it also a lot of barriers for those who can't. And that is one of the reasons maybe why it is not so often when people are maybe adapting or adjusting or changing OER, which are already there. They like to reinvent the wheel all the time because they need to contextualize it to their purposes and their language, their culture. And quite often OER is also developed by the Western world, so to say, and also like people like us, well-educated people. So there are many problems in one way, I can stress already when we talk about OER and when we talk about the inclusiveness and how to embrace diversity. Actually, there are special advocates who really talk about and I'm one of them, because it is with all the good things with the open movement and with the OER, there are some barriers which we have to treat very humble and with very great respect. About human rights, education is a human right, and qualified education is a human right for all. And as we all know, that is very highly on the agenda for the SDGs, qualified education for all to be reached in 2030 or even before. Some pessimists are even saying that maybe we can't reach that if we don't change our attitudes and values and strategies, how to work on this. We will not reach that in 2030, although it is just 10 years ahead. So that is one reason why your webinar series are so important, to not just raise awareness, but also to make the implementation realistic. So human rights, it is about trust, it is about justice, which we just talked about, it is about peace, it is about love, it is about human beings, and also to allow qualified educational resources for all, not just those who are privileged can buy books or softwares, etc., but also for the lifelong learning agenda, to learn throughout life, wherever you are, whatever kind of needs you have. So OER is the purpose of OER, and the foundation why OER is important is about social justice and human rights. So we will never forget that. Talking about the SDGs, we have the SDG number 4, which is specially dedicated to education, as we know, and that is important. And when the SDGs was developed, actually already at that time, it was decided to have a special goal on education, as this one will have an impact on all of the others. Either it will have a direct impact, or it will innovate and foster the others, or it will lead to that the other can be reached as well. And when we talk about OER, there are maybe special focus on some of the OER except SDG 4, and that is number 5, about gender equality. I talked a little about that before, because many OERs are developed, for example, by male. And that will maybe not always mirror the female perspectives. And also the use, when we come to the use of OER, it is important. Number 9, about industry and innovation and infrastructure. To really implement the whole agenda of OER, we need to have a solid infrastructure for that. And also talking about lifelong learning. And for the industry, for example, learning in time, just for me, micro-learning. OER are typically micro-learning possibilities. So number 9 is also very important. So is number 10, about reduced inequalities. I talked about the diversity before, to include everyone in all means. Number 16, about peace. Number 17, which is the goal for partnerships for all the other goals. So you see, it is not just number 4, which include explicitly OER, but also many of the other ones, and especially those ones which I mentioned. We also have to talk about how does the educational ecosystem look like. First of all, we have the whole K-12 and higher education and the lifelong learning agendas. And then there are many stakeholders involved, like students, educators, administrators, government, and then also about teaching and learning, research, and public community service. And you see the lines are drawn here and there and everywhere. And that is also why you need to have this ecosystem and the more rhizomatic perspective and not the silos infrastructure. This is not typical for OER, but it is especially typical for OER, because quite often it is teachers like, I think you are very much aware of in your organizations, that the teachers are really struggling with the use and implementation and to find OERs. But if the infrastructure, the leadership, the management, the support, the incentives, etc., the pedagogy are not there, it is very hard. And we can't trust the educators as such, but we need to have the ecosystem of the whole system. This is, of course, nothing new for you, but I think it is very important to emphasize it. So why is open education so important? We have already talked so much about open social justice and human rights, but also it is expand access to education. It improves the quality of education, because when we share, when we have peer reviews, open peer reviews, then we can give feedback and get feedback from others, from other peers. You know, when you are publishing things for a journal, for example, first of all, it takes several years to write an article. Then it takes a very, very long time to get it peer reviewed. Then it gets very, very long time to get it published. And sometimes it's just peer reviewed from, you know, people from the journal and colleagues from the editor, etc. So it's not really transparent. And then when the article or publication is out, it is already too old. But when you have a transparent and open publishing system, it is more quality. When you have this peer review system, is peer review system. It also makes education more affordable, of course, and it can improve student success and foster collaboration and sharing with co-creation. It is often like that when you are discussing with others, then you learn a lot yourself, and you learn together. And when you co-create, it's easier to come further on than if you're just struggling with something yourself. You just have 2 hands and 2 eyes and 2 ears. But when you are working together with others, you can see the things from different kind of perspectives, and then you can come further on. It also generates pedagogical innovation. And that is very, very important, because again, it is not just the resources as such, because when you're working with open education resources, you also have to change your pedagogy towards an open pedagogy, towards a pedagogy of gratitude, towards a pedagogy of trust, but also towards a pedagogy of fun and the joy of learning. And of course, it fosters international partnerships. As we are here today, for example, learning together. People are coming from different kinds, kind of the world, from different countries, different kind of contexts, different kind of professions, different kind of organizations, etc. So it fosters international cooperation and partnerships. There are some open principles, and I'm sure you are aware of those and maybe some others as well. I will just leave the slide for you so you can read yourself and see if you recognize them, and if there are others, we are more than happy to discuss that with you later on. This is not claimed to be the whole list. There is just some examples. But maybe one of the most important is this about transparency and collaboration and access and inclusiveness. And that goes again back to the discussion we had earlier on about social justice and human rights and the SDGs. So just to remind ourselves about the timeline, we have been around with OER since some 20 years by now. And that is a rather long period, but on the other hand, maybe in the long run, a rather short time. But it is important to remind ourselves about this. It started already in 2002 when the term was coined at the Paris conference with UNESCO. And also, as I mentioned before, the MIT launched some of the materials for free. And the main purpose for that was, of course, for some kind of marketing MIT and to recruit students for their master programs. So it was not just for the common good, but it was also, of course, for the common good. And then we got the first public declaration, the Cape Town Declaration, and we got the Paris Declaration from 2012. And we got the Cape Town Declaration 10 plus, some 10 years later. And then in 2017, we had the Ljubljana Declaration and the ministerial statement. I don't know if some of you were at that conference in Ljubljana at that time, but that was really the 4 steps before the OER recommendation, and the consultation in 2018 was out, and in 2019, almost 200 member countries unified about the UNESCO recommendation. And that was really a milestone in the history of OER. And it is important to remember it has taken us very, very long time. And this declaration, this recommendation, which was stated already at the Ljubljana conference, is that it is time to move from awareness raising. We have done some 20 years about that already by now. Now it is time for implementation and action and policies, and to involve all stakeholders in a broad mean. So this is this small book, Cape Town Open Education Declaration, 10th anniversary. I think you have seen it. And I think this one is very important because it really shows us how important it is to see OER in this more contextual approach and see the ecosystem. It is about communication open. It is about empowering the next generation. We have seen, for example, now during the COVID-19 that open education resources have been very, very much more used and also implemented because there is a need, and also because young people and students are sitting home with homeschooling, and they have to take the resources from somewhere, and they know how to do it. So we need to learn from the younger generation and also to empower the next generation. And it's also very much about thinking outside the institution. We mentioned about partnership, for example, earlier on. It is about data and analytics. We can learn a lot from the use of OER. It's about with the learning analytics, for example. It is about connecting with other open movements. So again, to see the ecosystem. And also the open education for development. I mentioned the open pedagogy, which I mentioned before. You can't just have your own traditional pedagogy from the 18th century when you're using and implementing open education and OER. Opening up public funded resources, and then of course the whole copyright reform for education. So coming closer to maybe what is OER about, it is about those 5 R described already by David Willer many years ago. Retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. And I'm sure you are familiar with that because at the first webinar you had, where I attended, we discussed about this as well. And then I added the 6R, which is about recognition. And actually, it was not just by myself, it was also from my colleague at UNESCO Center in Moscow, Svetlana Kryskorna, who really argued for that. And me too, of course, because it is important to be recognized both for using OER, but also for maybe developing or adapting or translating, because there need to be incentives. That is the whole idea about recognition. You need to be recognized what you are doing and why you are embracing this openness approach. So we have the CC licensing, and quite often I hear, as I'm sure you are doing that as well, that, oh, it is an internet, so it's free. It must be an OER. But of course, that is not the case. Actually, it is just, as you see from this slide, it is just 4 above combinations, which are OER. And actually, advocates as myself and many others are saying even that it is just the 2 first ones. The one about CC BY, with to be recognized, the author had to be recognized, and the CC BY share alike. Of course, it can be discussed, but definitely not the 2 last ones are not OER. But as I said, quite many people, and quite often I hear that, oh, it's an internet, it must be free, so I can use it, I can take it, and I can adapt it, and I can do what I like. Yes, you can, if it has the right license. So you always have to check. This is just for the complete picture, what you can do and what you can't do with those CC licensing. CC Commons have a new site, I'm sure you have seen it, and I will also show it later on, where you really can make it easy for yourself what you are looking for. Are you looking for just to get some information about OER, or do you like to get commercial use of it, or do you like to modify, and then you can filter your search engineer. So it was an important milestone, as I've already said several times, when the UNESCO OER recommendation was adopted by almost 200 countries, which signed in to work on implementation. And all us who are advocates, and all others as well, have to really take this very seriously and to discuss with our authorities, the institutions, organizations, how this work is in progress. UNESCO has, of course, a lot of pages and a lot of resources where you can find more information. I will go through some of them. The recommendation is important because it is just the 12th recommendation from UNESCO, which really is a recommendation. And you know, UNESCO do a lot of work in different kind of areas, and this is the 12th recommendation they are working on. And that signals how important this recommendation is and how it can make a difference if we are dealing with it well. So it's the only existing international standard setting for OER. And it's also, its efforts is to bring together a wide diversity of stakeholders. At the same time, there were new definitions on scope. As you're aware of, we have a new definition of open education resources. There is a new definition of open license. There is a new statement about information and communication technology. And what is very interesting is about the stakeholders. As you can see, here it is all kinds of stakeholders. It's teachers, educators, learners, governmentals, bodies, parents, support personnel, librarians, museum, all kinds of stakeholders, which we have to work together with in partnership. And I'm very happy that parents is here as well, and not at least due to the COVID-19 pandemic with the homeschooling. It is important to involve the parents so that the students and the learners can be aware of and can use OER. And what they can use and what they can't use, and how they can use it, of course. You see publishers are mentioned here as well, and that is maybe another story, because some publishers are not very friend about OER because of the financing. The recommendation is built on 5 areas. It's about capacity building of all those stakeholders which we talked about earlier on. It is about develop supportive policy to ensure inclusive and equitable access of OER, to nurture the creation of sustainable models of OER, and to facilitate international cooperation. Actually, this 5th one is embedded in all the 4 ones. So by those areas in the recommendation, you see it is really about the ecosystem, not just about the resources as such. Of course, maybe it's not like that one person can work on everything at the same time. And that's also the reason why we have to work in partnership, because maybe some people, some organizations, some institutions maybe work on different kind of things, you know. But the OER recommendation, if you really, really read it carefully, it really, you really see the ecosystem of opening up education and open education. And you can see in more or less every line that social justice and human rights are more or less embedded or is in between the lines. Besides those 5 areas, they also suggested, monitoring and evaluation. Those 3 areas to develop appropriate research and to collect and disseminate progress and good practices. And I mean, that is really what you are doing now with your webinars, to collect good practices. It's also about to develop strategies to monitor the educational effectiveness, both in long time and short time perspectives, of course. So what UNESCO is really, really promoting is that from now on, or from 2019 in November 25th, everything on OER, OEP, OEC, open education practices and open education cultures have to be related to the UNESCO OER recommendation and the monitoring and evaluation. Because first then we can see again the whole perspectives. We can map where things comes together and how the use and how the implementation of the resources as such contribute to reach the 5 areas in the recommendation. This is, of course, not an easy task, but it is easy if we do it already from the beginning. And this is really, really what UNESCO would like to see. how we can link everything what we are doing, even your webinar today, for example, and my contribution to this webinar today will be linked to one of the areas. Maybe the first one about capacity building. Maybe also about how to develop policies. And each of us can do it in different ways, depending where we are working and depending what our needs are and our journey to within the OER pathways, so to say. I myself am working very much about policy and strategies and this kind of thing. So of course I will link this webinar in what I'm doing. I used to be active in social media and blogs or publications, etc. So I will take that perspective, of course, and you will take yours. But everything what we are doing from now on or from 2019 have to be linked, because first then we can have evidence why it is important and how it can have an impact at individual level, at like the micro level, like the meso level, at the institution, like the macro level, at the country, for example, or internationally. So to support institutions and countries doing this, because it's not an easy task, UNESCO also launched the OER Dynamic Coalition. Actually, they did that 2nd of March 2020. It was at the UNESCO's conference for mobile learning, actually when the COVID-19 has this outbreak, so the conference was cancelled, but it was online and the Dynamic Coalition was launched. So they have a special person who is dedicated to work on this, to support countries and to work together with different kind of organizations, and they have a lot of information on the webpage. So please, if you like to go there, and please follow their initiatives. Actually, on the 1st of March, I'm involved in the EDEN, the European Distance E-Learning Network, and we are each year hosting webinar series the whole week for the Open Education Week. Maybe you have heard about that. Open Education Week, it goes from the 1st to the 5th of March this year. And on the 1st of March, we have a special webinar, which I'm host for, with all the international organizations, including UNESCO. And UNESCO will talk about this OER Dynamic Coalition at that time as well. It will be 5 o'clock Central European time on Monday for 1.5 hours. And not just from UNESCO, but we have some 6 persons from different kind of organizations talking. So we will also give some kind of policy statement, what is needed in the way forward. So saying that, the Dynamic Coalition does a great job and they are willing to collaborate with all of us. So how can we support innovation with and through OER is also a question. Of course, raising awareness is important, and that was maybe the first one about capacity building, but it is time to move from capacity build, from awareness raising to really implementation. We can empower individuals, and that is why recognition is so important. We can encourage experimenting in pedagogy and practice. We talked about open pedagogy before. And also to think and act at the level of the ecosystem. And also to leverage the power of networks, like this one, for example. So there are many ways how we can move further on. This is just a slide I have for the overview about the key benefits of OER for faculties, for example. These slides come from the Open University in UK. And you can see it can enhance student learning, enhance teacher practice, have an impact on productivity, catalyst for changes in teaching practice, etc. I will not go through this in detail. But maybe on the left-hand side, you see about collaboration, enrichment, efficiency, opportunities, and integration. So there are innovative dimensions built in the use of an implementation of OER and what kind of benefits there are for a faculty. During the COVID-19, UNESCO also launched a special both call and also web page about fighting COVID-19 to digital innovation and pedagogical transformation, and especially the use of OER. I don't know if you have come across that this one and you in this terrible time, 2020. Maybe you have used some of the resources. And I have also put together a lot of resources which are available here. UNESCO is also working with the ICDE competency framework for teachers. I think maybe you are aware of this one. Actually, the person who is in charge of the Dynamic Coalition, the Dynamic OER Coalition is also in charge of this one. So they are very much linked together because it is very much about the competencies for teachers. So now we're coming over to the area which maybe are more directed for you as a teacher and for your daily work. This is your page. When I was preparing for this webinar today, I went to your webpage and I really appreciate what you are doing. And I also see that you have a lot of useful information at your page. How to integrate materials into English language classes and how to use materials and how to build up your competence, etc. It's really a fantastic page. This is another one I think also you are very much aware of, about open education resources for English language instructions. It's also a wonderful page about how to integrate OER into English language instructions and classes. I would like to mention, when I have the opportunity, to mention the OER Word Map. You see, this is a map which is interactive and advocates around the globe. It's an open source page, and advocates around the globe, they can contribute with different kind of things about policies, for example, about resources, about people, about products, about projects. And then if you are, for example, in Toronto, as many of you are, you can look what is happening in Canada, what is happening in Toronto. Are there something which I can take use of? Or for me here in Sweden, are there other people also working with this kind of things and what is going on? And how can I contribute and collaborate with others? Or maybe if I'm looking for a collaborator in Africa, for example, for one of my projects, I can go here and have a look who is in charge and what are they doing in South Africa, for example. And this map is built by us. So it is not a static map, it is built together. And again, it's transparent and it's peer-reviewed and it is quality because it is a common work for common goods. Recently, CC Commons were in charge for this OER policy registry about policies, but now it goes to hand in hand with the OER Word Map. And here you can see, for example, are there any policies in Canada and how does those look like, and what are they about, and you can follow what is happening, or you can even, if you are working with a policy from your institution, you can add that policy to this OER policy registry. So again, this is common work for common good. So we can implement really the OER recommendation and to move forwards. Because no one can do everything themselves, but together we can do a lot. This is, now I come over to some kind of search engines for OER. This is the CC Commons, the Creative Commons old page, I would say. I think you maybe are familiar with this one, where you could search for example, images, music, videos, or whatever. But now they have changed since I think it was in autumn. So maybe you have seen this or and used this one. So now you can just search the content And you see, I want something I can use commercially. I want something I can modify or adapt. 2 easy questions to get started. And if you click, for example, modify or adapt, then you come to some kind of resources. And if you click on use commercially, then of course you have to come to others. So you can filter your search. And this is very, very easy. And very, very user-friendly. 2 easy questions to start with. So it's not complicated at all. Of course, many of us search for Google Advanced, maybe at the first time. That is what I'm doing more or less often. You can search directly from Google Advanced and get a lot of OERs coming up, depending what you're looking for. Then you can go to OER Commons, where you can both explore, you can create, and you can collaborate. So again, here you can see that you can see what you're looking for, what kind of subject, what kind of educational level. And then you can, again, filter what you are looking for. And you can, of course, also add your own resources here. The UNESCO ICT, which I mentioned before, they have also two OER, this especially competence framework for teachers, where you also can filter your search and you can add your resources. I often myself got a question, I think you do as well. So I just decided to just show some resources where you can, if you don't go to OER Commons or Google or CC Search, you can go directly to some other resources. So this is just some of them. So that was all for me so far, and my motto is really about caring is sharing, and sharing is caring, because then we can move forwards. And not all of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. So let's collaborate and let's share together. So I'm very happy to have a dialogue now. I think we have still some time for that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Ossiannilsson. We have time for questions. I hope that you learned a lot. I myself learned a lot. Thank you for sharing the very big picture of the importance of the OER movement from the social justice perspective, from the perspective of implementation and its importance, the very interesting and very rich resources. We'll give you access to the recording, and Charity has also shared some of the links. If you have questions here, please write them, or just feel free to open the mic and talk and ask your question. Give you some time to think. In the meanwhile, I myself have a question. Not a surprise, right? So, Dr. Ossiannilsson, you mentioned that it's been already 20 years that ICDE and all the organizations in eating and the UNESCO and all of those, right, that you talked about today, raising awareness. 20 years already. And here we are doing a series when it comes to the English language teaching about raising awareness. So we are 20 years behind, unfortunately, but it's never too late, I guess, right? So you also emphasize the importance of moving forward from the awareness to the implementation. And here, unfortunately, the language teacher associations, and we have leaders here with us from from the Gulf, from Africa, from other parts of the world attending this webinar, we have to admit and recognize that we are behind in even recognizing the importance of OER, let alone the awareness and the implementation. So Dr. Ebba, what is your recommendation for them? How can they get started? And what can we do? We are the grassroots here. Charity, Sharon and I, we are simply members of TESOL International Associations, and we are aware of this importance, and we've been really working hard to push forward. What about the leadership perspective?
Yes, that is a very, very important questions you're raising, Shadia, really. Of course, I mentioned this because I think it is important to reflect on this, because I know that we are all struggling all over the world still about awareness raising. And you as well as me, sometimes when I'm talking about this kind of issues, many people don't know what it is. They haven't heard it before. Oh, what are you saying? Oh, what is that? You know, they don't have a clue. But of course, in that way, it is good, because then you have a reason to explain and to show. And I think that is maybe the most important, that we have to go from talk the talk to walk the talk.
Okay.
That is one thing. And of course, when people are asking you things, you can take the opportunity to explain. And that was also one of the reasons why I started with this broad perspective, because I mean, it is not a deal as such to look for results on a Google search, for example. That is not, because it is for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the opportunity, please take the whole, not maybe as much as I did today, but to see the perspectives about it. But so I think in whatever we are doing and whatever kind of discussion we have with whoever it is, we need to take the opportunity to how to say, to not just about awareness raising, but to discuss about the message about it and why it can make a difference for so many people, for qualified educational resources. And then you mentioned yourself about leadership. I myself, I think sometimes we have put too much emphasis and too much pressure on the teachers. And we have more or less ignored the leadership level. So that was also why I mentioned about we need to talk about all the levels wherever we are. I mean, leadership is really, really important. And to understand this whole picture of the open educational movement, it is a leadership question. It is about policy. It is about strategies. It is about incentives. It is, of course, about money. It is about how you allocate funding and money and resources and people and these kind of things. So it's not just a teacher question.
Right. So to link to that, the money is the issue, right? Ironically, OER is for social justice and educational inequity, educational equity, and for free, right? For everybody, for the teacher, for students, and everyone around the world. But it does still need funding and financing to create, for instance, a repository, right? And that is, I think, the main challenge for at least in the English language teaching field for the associations. So, in like a nutshell, how if let's say if Africa ELTA or TESOL International or TESOL Gulf or Kuwait, or the people that we have here today, if they want to adopt this idea of OER and they're going to have a repository, what are the very, very basic steps that we need to take?
First of all, I think there is a very large misunderstanding that as soon as you're talking about OER, it is free. That is, of course, not the case. There is no lunches for free, so to say. Okay. It is free for the learners, for the users. But of course, there is a lot of costs for those who develop it, for those who have the repositories, for, everything. That is also why you need to have this ecosystem and to really take the recommendations seriously. That there need to be, and there also need to be time, for example, for teachers to develop repositories. So that is a leadership question again, how you allocate time for the teachers. It's not just to have an X number of classes or X number of students. You need to have time to change your pedagogical approach, and because it takes time. So it's really, really a leadership question. And that's again why I choose to have this umbrella perspective, because it is the ecosystem, the holistic perspective, which is very, very important. And all the people who are involved. And I think also, if you can work together with peers, for example, if you can work together with the students, I know in some places, in one of my colleagues from the OER Advocacy Committee, for example, in California, he works with students who are OER ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a great initiative, because when you work together with students, and that is also maybe one reason why they have come quite far in countries in Africa, for example, because they can't afford to buy the books. So you're pressured to work with OER. And sometimes when you are in the pressure, you can do the changes.
Right. So the UNESCO, you mentioned the UNESCO that provides some funding or something like that. Is it we need to, like,
No,
for
I don't
instance,
think,
in no, maybe
not
I got it
that they
wrong.
provide funding. I mentioned that they have a lot of resources, I mean, which you can use.
Okay.
And of course, they have a support, and that is also some kind of funding, but not the real money, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how it is in Canada, but for example, in Europe, we have a lot of funding from the European Commission for different kind of projects. But I also will say that you can't just trust on projects. You need to, and that is also one of the reasons why the recommendations are so important, because that is about sustainable business models for OER. Because if you just work on projects, for example, when the project is over, the funding is over, and people are over, so then you start again from the beginning. You need to build in sustainability. That is very important.
So basically, we refer back to the UNESCO recommendations, and from there you create the steps for what do you need, how do you build the ecosystem that you're talking about, and all the other recommendations that follow.
There are a couple of questions here.
All right. Yes, please.
Yeah, there is one from Laura. I mean, she asked almost at the beginning of the presentation of Dr. Ossiannilsson. She says, does anyone know if there are ministries of education that have accepted OER resources in public primary school ELT? Do you know anything about that, Doctor?
Yes. I know from my own country in Sweden, it is especially for K-12, the K-12 sector, they are quite far ahead with repositories, with the use and with the implementation of OER.
Okay.
Can you say a bit how that came about? Did the Ministry of Education then accept? Did they have to pre-approve the materials and the work groups? Or was it always very open as to what teachers could use?
Actually, many years ago, it started on volunteer. One of the things I was thinking about started many years ago on from volunteer base. There were teachers like maybe you and others who were thinking we need to do something. So they really started from scratch. So, but what they built, I think it is now some maybe 15 or maybe even 20 years ago. It is called lessons.se. So they put there they can use and create together, for example, courses, for example, lesson plans, for example, materials, and that is so well distributed nowadays. So it is so well recognized. That is one example, and also in my country, the Internet Foundation are working very hard on this. And I think there are some similar organizations like the Internet Foundation in other countries, and you can work together with them. So they have also enormous resources just for free and just for use and reuse.
All right. There's
Okay,
another
thank you.
question.
Yes.
Mary, please.
Yes, there is another question from Christine. She's, I mean, already, Chart, you already answered this, but it would be very interesting if you answer as well, Professor Dr. Ossiannilsson. Have you gotten pushback from publishers against the OER movement?
That's a great question.
Not me that directly, but I know that the publishers are not really fond of it because they, I mean, each one would like to earn money, and they earn money on the books. And that is also one reason why, also, for example, in my country, the labor organization for teachers are not very fond of it either, because many teachers are publishing books which they use in the courses at university level, for example. So they also earn money on that. But I think, I mean, even if they are not for it, maybe not against it, I think it is important that we start to talk with publisher, and many of the networks I am in for the moment and the conversations I have, we very, very much talk about that we really need to start to talk with the publishers, because they have to change their agenda as well.
All right. I
I
think
saw that there was a question, just a more maybe technical question about the links, and I can share my slides with you, and I also have it on SlideShare, and I always put the links on my slides. For everything I showed today, there are links.
All right. Thank you very much. This is the last one, a follow-up to the publisher question is, are there programs which face issues developing OER when they have built their curriculum based on the textbook series? Are you aware of any? Or would that be a potential problem?
I can't say some example actually on that. But maybe I can say, I don't know if it really fits onto this question, but I can give an example from Oxford University, how they started, and you also talked about that earlier on how to get started. They did it like this model, that every time, because it is what is funded by tax money should go back to taxpayers. I mean, that is the whole idea behind. So every time when teachers were talking about, to develop something, whatever it was, people from, in this case, was from the library, they always discussed with that teachers or with the academics, what should be published in what way. And then they always discussed about the Creative Commons licensings and the different ways to publish it. And of course, first, the academics were very negative, because they were saying, oh, I can't do this. I can't just put my things up for as OER, because then I will not be invited for as keynote or invited here and there, and but then again they started to discuss for everything which was going to be published. They had this discussion, and that goes back to your questions before, Shandia, about how to get started. So then suddenly they got the teachers and the academics with them, so to say. And then they noticed, and then the academics come themselves to say, oh, someone saw this one and someone saw that one, so now I'm invited here. Now now they would like to use this and this. So they got recognition, because then there was incentives. It is important to build those incentives.
Yep. Thank you very, very much. And now we come to an end for this session. We've had 3 minutes past our time. It is great to have you, Dr. Ossiannilsson. Very informative, as we can see from the chat as well. Thank you for being here, and please join us next week, next Saturday, same time, with Dr. Nelly Deutsch. It will be a workshop, a hands-on this time, workshop on how to create OER projects using Wiki Educator. So we hope to see you next week as well. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, now
thank you so much, and all the best to all of you. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.